support the global response to coronavirus, but it is simply not enough on its own to reduce risks to the United Kingdom. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is clear that there are still too many people coming in and out of our country each day. And today I am announcing further action to strengthen the health measures that we already have at the border, but to reduce passenger flow, so that only a small number of people for whom it is absolutely essential to travel are doing so, and therefore reducing the risk to our world-leading vaccine programme. So for those entering the UK, there will be a number of measures. Firstly, the police have stepped up checks and are carrying out more physical checks at addresses to ensure that people are complying with the self-isolation rules. Second, we will continue to refuse entry to non-UK residents from red list countries which are already subject to the UK travel ban. Third, as the Prime Minister has said, we will introduce a new managed isolation process in hotels for those who cannot be refused entry, including those arriving home from countries where we have already imposed international travel bans. They will be required to isolate for 10 days without exception. And the Department of Health and Social Care will set out further details on this approach next week. And for those travelling out of the UK, we will also be enhancing and stepping up enforcement rules. Because despite the stay-at-home regulations, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are still seeing people not complying with these rules. The rules are clear. People should be staying at home unless they have a valid reason to leave. Going on holiday is not a valid reason. So we will introduce a new requirement so that people wishing to travel must first make a declaration as to why they need to travel. This reason for travel will be checked by carriers prior to departure. And this approach, Madam Deputy Speaker, effectively mirrors the checks on arrivals that are already in place with the passenger locator form. Secondly, working with policing partners, we will increase police presence at ports and at airports, fining those in breach of the stay-at-home regulations. Anyone who does not have a valid reason for travel will be directed to return home, or they will face a fine. Third, we will urgently review the list of travel exemptions made to make sure that only the most important and with exceptional reasons are included. These are crucial new measures to protect us all, but also to complement the robust action we have consistently taken at the border. And while these new measures are being operationalised, I would just like to remind anyone seeking to enter our country to comply with the rules. This includes providing evidence of a negative COVID test before entering the United Kingdom, self-isolation on arrival for 10 days, and the completion of the passenger locator form. Immediately stepping up enforcement means that if you do not follow the regulations, you will face a fine. Madam Deputy Speaker, these new measures at the border are a necessary step to protect the public and our world-class vaccination programme. Every layer of protection we have put in place will help to reduce the risk of transmission of this virus and any new potential strain from entering the UK. And as we have done, Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout this global health emergency, we will continue to take all steps necessary to protect the public and help prevent the spread of this virus. I commend the statement to the House.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. We stand here today in knowledge of the terrible fact that over 100,000 people have died as a result of this awful virus. We mourn all of those lost and think of those families for whom life will never be the same again. And in marking this, it is not enough to say, let us wait to find out why Britain has fared so badly. We must learn from past mistakes and crucially act now. And one of the key areas where the government has clearly fallen short is on protecting our borders. And I'm deeply concerned that the measures outlined today are yet another example of this. Too little, too late. Yet again, the government is lurching from one crisis to another, devoid of strategy. And limiting hotel quarantining to only a limited number of countries from which travel from non-UK residents was already banned, means that the Home Secretary's proposals do not go anywhere near far enough. And perhaps that's why it appears there's been briefing to newspapers that the Home Secretary is personally not in support of the policy she's now advocating to the public. Mutations of the virus risk undermining the efficacy of the vaccines, threatening life and hope. We cannot know where these mutations will emerge from next, and the truth is the government is once again behind the curve. Labour is calling for a comprehensive hotel quarantining. Today's announcement is too limited. It leaves huge gaps in our defences against emerging strains. We know that the strains that emerged in South Africa and Brazil have already reached these shores. Little wonder, really, when controls have been so lax. With just 3 in every 100 people quarantining successfully contacted, and border testing only introduced 10 months after our first lockdown. And even then, the start had to be delayed because the government couldn't get the necessary systems in place. We've seen this reluctance to be decisive from the start of the crisis. From the 1st of January to the 23rd of March last year, only 273 people were formally quarantined when over 18 million people entered the country by air. And this at a time, by the way, when the government's own chief scientific advisor said, and I quote, "A lot of the cases in the UK didn't come from China. They came from European imports and the high level of travel into the UK at the time." In April, I wrote to the Home Secretary to ask her to learn the lessons, but by May still, the UK was an international outlier with no travel controls. Now, as the Home Secretary today belatedly announces very limited hotel quarantining, many questions remain which I would appreciate if she could address. Firstly, how can we be assured that travellers will not arrive with emergent strains via countries that are not on the control list? Second, what support is being made available to ensure improvements to quarantine compliance and the isolation assurance service? And frankly, why has it taken so long to step up checks, as the Home Secretary said today, when we know the system's been failing for months? What discussions have taken place with hotel chains to ensure the availability of rooms? And for those travelling out of the United Kingdom, again, why is the enforcement only being stepped up now? And will the Home Secretary ensure that sufficient support and sufficient resources are made available for these very important tasks? And when, Madam Deputy Speaker, will the government announce a sector-specific support package for aviation? Getting this policy right is absolutely crucial. The government cannot allow our border policy to continue to be the Achilles heel of the heroic efforts of the British people during this pandemic.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think there are a number of comments that I would just like to make before I come to the honourable gentleman's questions. First of all, I think it's fair to say that compared to this time last year, and I was here yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, reeling off the endless measures at the border that have been put in place since January last year, including Foreign Office advice, statutory instruments, regulations and powers under the Coronavirus Act, and then, of course, quarantine, passenger locator forms and test and release, as well as banning flights and travel from specific countries. I think it's important to recognise that because of the incredible work that we have in this country with regards to the vaccine, our world-leading vaccine programme, we're in a very different situation now last year because of the additional risk to public health caused by new variants. And it's this new variant, obviously, that we should be focused on, because obviously that could be less susceptible, it could have implications for the vaccine. So it is important that we reduce risk by reducing the number of people who enter our country and could be a new threat, obviously, in terms of the variants and mutations. We've already implemented numerous measures and protections to reduce that risk. But these are a number of new additional levels of protection at our disposal that are being announced today, but also forthcoming with regards to hotels. And I'm going to come on to the specifics in a minute. The Honourable Gentleman has also made the point about travel. Now, the fact of the matter is there are reductions in travel already. The number of people that are travelling has reduced by 90%, obviously, compared to this time last year. But obviously that number will become lower through various travel bans that have been put in place. He's touched on enforcement measures and the IAS service and also police enforcement. There are a number of new measures, or enhanced measures, I should say, that will increase the checks that will take place. So IS service, for example, from tomorrow will be checking over 5,000 people. IS will also contact those who arrive in the way in which they have been 10 days prior, in the way in which they are naturally asked to do so with regards to self-isolation. But of course, police presence. I've spoken today about enhanced police presence at ports and at borders and at airports. There will be an increase of around 1,000 targeted follow-up visits a day. And this, at a time when the numbers are reducing, speaks about the stringency of these measures, and that speaks to the point about giving assurance around these particular enforcement measures. I think it is disappointing, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Gentleman naturally being critical of government measures. I said yesterday, I've said on a number of occasions, I'll say it again today, from January last year, we have had a led approach to our measures at the border. This is clearly about, through the travel ban, having a ban on travel from countries that pose a risk, high-risk countries, and there are measures in place that I've outlined. We're building upon those. But I think for his party in particular, to claim that they've been calling for tougher restrictions since the start of this pandemic is absolute nonsense, because it's simply not the case. They themselves have been flip-flopping, as I said yesterday again, in terms of calling quarantine a blunt tool, a blunt instrument. Shadow Transport Secretary saying that quarantine measures should be lessened. There is inconsistency clearly in the position of the party opposite, and we have always taken an approach to manage risk. On the point that he makes with regards to support packages, there's work taking place across government. That's other government departments, but we're working together on that. In terms of discussions with hotel chains, those discussions naturally are underway. That's not for me right now to talk about those discussions, but there's a lot of work taking place. And I think, again, it's important, Madam Deputy Speaker, to recognise that these measures and all measures have logistical and operational implications as well as challenges. We will work through those practicalities with all our stakeholders, all our partners. My colleagues in government will come to the House, as the Honourable Gentleman would expect, to provide the updates, whether it's on hotels, whether it's on sectoral packages, the dialogues that are taking place. And I would just finally like to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think the British public absolutely recognise that this is a deeply, deeply challenging period for our country. No one will dispute that these are difficult times throughout this global pandemic, but there is no simple or single binary approach that can be taken. It is right that we manage risk. It is right that we do so in this layered approach. But also, I think the British public, our constituents in particular, Madam Deputy Speaker, they'd like to see all political parties come together at this important time to look at how we can bring in these measures and support these measures so that we can protect public health.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. I very much welcome the evidence and nuance-based approach that the Home Secretary has outlined today. As opposed to a blanket approach that seems to be advocated by her shadow, which I believe would lead to impacts on trade and those that do need essential business, our ability to actually hotel quarantine so many people. And I know that he takes seriously the need of the aviation industry. I don't believe a blanket approach would do anything for that, so I welcome the government's approach. Can I ask the Home Secretary this? Knowing that some countries may be added on, and indeed some countries may be taken off the list where hotel quarantine is required, will that criteria be published, and also will it be subject to both further scrutiny and perhaps votes from this place? Thank you.
This is some important points, and he's absolutely right. I stood here yesterday, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the dispatch box, speaking about the importance of freight and the work the government has done over recent months, in fact at Christmas, the run up to Christmas, to keep freight moving, despite various closures of borders that took place, which completely make the Honourable Gentleman's point that you simply cannot have that viable approach. There are logistical and operational challenges, and clearly government is working through many of these. He makes some important points, obviously, about changes to guidance, changes to advice across government. So from the Department of Health to the Department of Transport to the FCDO, who play a very important role here as well, in terms of public communications and assurance to the public around countries and changes that take place. Clearly, government will publish that. Government will come to the House, to the Commons, to share that information. I would just like to conclude my comments, though, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying, though, the current guidance is clear that people should be staying at home unless they've got really exceptional reasons to travel. And, of course, going on holiday is not a justifiable excuse or reason.
Now we go to the spokesman for the SNP, Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. My Scottish Government colleagues are concerned as she knows that her proposals don't go far enough, and I would be grateful if she would confirm that she will listen to their representations. It is, of course, her department's responsibility to control the United Kingdom's external borders. Her department holds the passenger data, and the UK Border Force report to her. So it's right that the Home Secretary should be the one to address the risks raised by transmission of the virus by arrivals from abroad. So I'm going to repeat the questions I asked yesterday during the urgent question on this same topic, and which the Home Secretary did not answer at that time. I hope that having had 24 hours notice to think about my questions and to discuss them with her colleagues and advisors, she will now answer them. In April and May of last year, I wrote to her asking for comprehensive health protections at the UK's external borders, and I referred to the measures that were being introduced in other countries in Europe and across the world. Other honourable members in the Home Affairs Committee were making similar requests backed up by evidence. Last week, the Home Secretary admitted that we were right, and she said that she thought the United Kingdom should have closed its borders earlier. So can she now tell me why she failed to take the precautions that she knew were needed at the start of the pandemic? What stopped her from closing the borders? Was it her cabinet colleagues? And if so, why did she not resign and speak out, given the increased risk of transmission from people entering the country? And finally, have the government commissioned an assessment of what contribution the failure to close the borders earlier has made to the dreadful death toll across the United Kingdom? And will she put the results in the public domain? These are questions which concern not just my constituents and those of my SNP colleagues, but they concern people across the four nations. So will she please answer them? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, first of all, I will repeat very much what I said yesterday about working with all the devolved administrations, and clearly the government is doing that, and the Right Honourable Lady will be well aware of that. With regards to everyone now going retrospective in terms of thinking that they were first advocates of bringing in health measures at the border, clearly that was not the case. And I recall this from the Select Committee last April, and I mentioned that yesterday as well. And if I can reacquaint the Right Honourable Lady with the measures that had been brought in from January 2020, from the minutes of self-isolation advice that was given from the FCO at the time, from SAGE recommendations around self-isolation for specific countries, from the 10th of February to the new regulations and statutory instruments that were brought in, new powers for medical professionals and the police to detain individuals suspected of symptoms of COVID, to the guidance to UK airports, to the travel advice that was put out from the FCDO, all between February and March, the self-isolation measures introduced for specific countries, introducing mandatory quarantine, the passenger locator form as well back in June last year, to closing the border to Denmark with the first identification of a new strain, which of course we were able to deal with because of our genomic sequencing capacity in the UK, from test and release to banning flights from South Africa, which clearly is still in place, to carrier liability for pre-travel testing and pre-travel tests. These measures, each of these measures, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have introduced, have added another layer of protection against transmission of the virus, and that reduces the risk of new dangerous strains being imported into the UK. And I think the Honourable Lady should also, Right Honourable Lady, should reflect upon the fact that there is not a single measure that mitigates risk entirely. Every measure that has been brought in helps to reduce risk, helps to protect the vaccine, and importantly, helps to protect the British public and public health.
Sir Graham Brady.
Deputy Speaker, thank you. I agree with the Chairman of the Select Committee. With 1 million British jobs dependent on aviation and much of British commerce as well, the government must be right to be taking an evidence-based approach, not a blanket approach. Whilst we all hope that we will discover that the new variants are combated just as effectively by the vaccines as the existing variants in this country. If it were to be the case that new countries needed to be added to the red list, will she speak urgently to our Right Honourable friend the Chancellor about the support that will be needed by our aviation sector to prevent a massive hemorrhaging of jobs and prospects across much of the country?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is absolutely right in speaking of the sector, and he's a powerful advocate for the sector as well. And I know of his constituency interest with Manchester Airport Group and the work that he's conducted with them as well. There is no question, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said yesterday, I'll emphasise this again, that the sector they are our partners. They are the operational partners who we work with every single day, my colleagues in Border Force, for example. But specifically in terms of new additional lists or travel bans, basically, to specific countries, that work is always under review. And alongside that, we continue to work with our operational partners. We discuss with them, obviously, the implications of this. Those discussions will always continue, and government will always step up in whichever way it can to provide the necessary support needed.
Now we go to the Chairman of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome these measures, but they don't go far enough to deliver a comprehensive system. We know the Brazil and South Africa variant have already been identified across several continents, and in the first wave, less than 1% of new cases came from China, the overwhelming majority from European countries the government said were low risk at that time. So can I ask the Home Secretary about the number of people likely to still be arriving who are not covered by quarantine hotels, still won't have to do further tests on arrival, and will be able to go straight onto the public transport system from Heathrow or wherever they arrive? Can she confirm, is that likely to still be thousands of people each day? And does she think that is wise?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question. I think, first of all, it's important, and I come back to this point, that all the measures, every measure that has been introduced across government has provided degrees of protection, various layers and levels of protection against transmission of the virus. The Right Honourable Lady has heard me say already that travel is down from 90% compared to this time last year. Clearly there are travel bans in place for countries that are red listed, and that'll continue. And the announcement today will also reduce the number of travelling passengers. I do want to emphasise that, because people should simply not be travelling. And we see the examples, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will call some of them out. I mean, Border Force have given me examples where even at St Pancras, people have been turning up with their skis. That is clearly not acceptable. We see plenty of influencers on social media showing off about which parts of the world that they are in, mainly in sunny parts of the world. Going on holiday is not an exemption, and it's important that people stay at home. I would just like to say, of course, that with regards to the measures that are being announced today, and also with regards to quarantining, the hotel measures and package in particular, the hotel package that's under discussion right now, clearly, in terms of the application of that and the administration of that, and the Right Honourable Lady speaks about people getting on public transport. We want to absolutely reduce the risk of people travelling in that way. And therefore, these are measures that government are working through right now in terms of how people can travel to hotels, how they will quarantine, and I've already spoken about the checks that will also be put in place on individuals when it comes to self-isolation.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for his statement. Marjorie from Crook got in touch with me today. Like many of my North West Durham constituents, Marjorie is fed up of Labour playing politics with coronavirus. The Shadow Home Secretary himself has criticised our border measures before as a blunt tool. Today he's saying they don't go far enough. It's like some twisted version of Goldilocks, but the government solution is never just right. Does my right honourable friend agree with Marjorie that it's irresponsible to play politics with coronavirus? And will she also ensure that if these measures need to be extended further to other countries, they'll be done so at the earliest opportunity?
My friend is absolutely right, and I agree with everything he says about the party opposite in terms of their flip-flopping, but also their claims. And I would just like to praise Marjorie as well for, the points that she has made. I think she speaks for the British public, who are fed up with party politics being played at this critical time, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the public want to see unity rather than the type of gripes that we are seeing and hearing, or the approach of armchair generals in particular. But he asked an important question about, rolling out further travel bans to other countries. The government will absolutely not hesitate. If there are new strains emerging from other countries, the government will take action, which is exactly what Marjorie and the British public would expect.
Now we go to Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Home Secretary for the advance sight of her statement. Many of those that will be caught by these new measures will be travelling as the result of family bereavement and will already have incurred substantial cost very often at short notice. So can the Home Secretary tell me if there will be some sort of financial assistance available for people of modest means who find themselves in this position at that most difficult of times?
Well, my right honourable friend the right honourable gentleman is absolutely right in terms of highlighting the exceptional examples and the sad examples that, circumstances for people to travel, bereavement being a terrible, terrible case. The government is already in discussions with regards to exemptions and support packages and things of that nature. I'm unable, Madam Deputy Speaker, to confirm the details right now because this work is underway. But, it's a matter of time before my colleagues will obviously notify the House and share further information on this.
Now we go to Sir David Amos.
I very much support and welcome my right honourable friend's announcements of restrictions at our borders as a result of the current health crisis. Would she reassure me that regional airports such as Southend will be tasked to strictly enforce these rules, as a number of local residents have expressed concerns that coronavirus infections may be transmitted by arrivals through the airport?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I can understand why he's raising the importance of regional airports throughout this pandemic. They have played an important role. All airport operators take responsibility for the way in which they work with us, but also for enforcing coronavirus measures and restrictions. So that's social distancing and keeping passengers apart, particularly as they go up to PCPs and obviously them come across border force officers. It is absolutely right that airports who are our operational partners work with us to take responsibility, that shared responsibilities I've spoken about so frequently, in terms of checking with the carriers that the carriers and the passenger locator form is completed, but also ensuring that they themselves put those protective measures in place to stop the spread of this virus.
Now we go to Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very concerned about the continued threat of COVID-19 to frontline border force staff at Heathrow, as the new draconian fixed team working rosters have made social distancing difficult at the same time as COVID transmission rates have been at their highest. So can the Home Secretary confirm reports that COVID secure bubbles have repeatedly been breached due to understaffing and the new fixed rosters, and specifically outline what assessment she's made of the adequacy of all border force staff's working conditions?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her question. And it is an important question in terms of border force staff. Border force staff are on the front line day in, day out, trying to protect the public from the spread of this virus, and they are doing exceptional work. And yesterday I thanked them for the work that they are doing. In terms of measures that are in place to protect them, I'm absolutely focused on protecting our Border Force staff. It's absolutely right that that takes place. The head of Border Force, my colleagues across the Border Force team have been working assiduously with all Border Force colleagues, particularly at Heathrow Airport, because Heathrow Airport is a busy airport, as we saw on Saturday night, where queues did form because obviously we are enforcing 100% compliance checks. And with that, of course, I come back to my point, working with Heathrow Airport Limited in terms of the measures that they are putting in place for social distancing, keeping passengers distant from Border Force staff, and of course ensuring that our staff, my staff, are protected. That is my number one priority.
Now we go to Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I support the proportionate approach that my right honourable friend has adopted. But can she help me in relation to two linked matters? She said that she'll be looking urgently at the exceptions. Will she particularly bear in mind the need to make provision for those who may be repatriated for urgent medical treatment? And should the extension, we hope it does not, at any time involve any British overseas territory, would she bear in mind the need for early consultation with them? We hope it never comes to it. But again, we have medical and other obligations in some cases to them.
My right honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker, is absolutely right. The case of medical exemptions and urgencies have always been on the exemption list. The exemption list is under review right now. Colleagues across government, across all government departments, are reviewing the exemption list. And when changes are made, they will be publicised through the usual channels. And of course, anything that would affect overseas territories will also be under consideration, and that will also be put in the public domain.
And now we go to Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I listened very carefully to the Home Secretary's answer to the chair of the Select Committee earlier, and she didn't answer a rather direct and important question, which she will have estimates for, because this will be a policy based on evidence. How many people does she expect each day to have to go into quarantine in a hotel? And how many people entering the UK each day does she estimate will not have to go into quarantine under these new measures?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think first of all it's important to recognise we do have numbers in terms of the number of people coming through our border every single day. These new measures, though, and I think it's important to put this into context, these new measures will bring those numbers even further down. So we still have a lot of British nationals that are travelling, and clearly the advice is, and the guidance is clear, people should not be travelling, they should be staying at home. And through the enforcement measures, that will reduce dramatically. And the government is already working out capacity in terms of hotel accommodation, and also the, in light of the period of self-isolation that will be required. And government will happily share those figures with colleagues in due course.
Now we go to Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is absolutely right that the government take necessary and appropriate steps to keep our country safe from these new variants of the virus that are emerging around the world. And I welcome the Home Secretary's statement. But she will know that any additional restrictions on travel will further damage the aviation sector that has been deeply impacted by this pandemic. When businesses in other sectors have been forced to close or unable to trade because of restrictions, specific financial support has been made available. So can I ask the Home Secretary if she will talk to the Secretary of State for Transport and the Chancellor to see what specific support can now be provided for airlines and airports to ensure that they are in a position to help lead our recovery in the future?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to give my honourable friend every assurance that we are working together across transport, the Treasury, the Foreign Office with regards to the aviation and the travel sector. Conversations and discussions are underway. As I said earlier on, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are our operational partners. We work collectively with them, so those discussions are underway, and I'd just like to give them that assurance.
And now we go to Steve McCabe.
How will the quarantine hotels be selected? And will the Home Secretary set a limit on how far such a hotel can be from the arrival airport so as to minimise risks during transfers, for which I assume she will also be responsible?
Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, with regards to hotels and measures, as I've indicated already, that work is underway in terms of looking at procurement of hotels, who the partners are going to be, but also further information around them. So government will be setting out over the next few days, the coming days, further information with regards to hotels and the processes around them. That work, as I indicated earlier on, there are logistical and operational aspects that we are in discussions underway right now, and so my colleagues will come back to the House and provide that information.
Now we go to Deanna Davison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for her statement. Protecting the British people quite rightly has to be our priority, and so it is right that our border measures have been under constant review since the pandemic began. But in light of today's announcement, can my right honourable friend confirm that our border force and other frontline emergency workers will be given all the support they need to enforce these rules so that they can keep themselves and the British public safe?
Friend is absolutely right. Border Force are doing incredible work on the front line, and I'm seeing that and getting reports of that every single day. It's important that they stay safe, which is why we have strong measures in place for them. But alongside that, clearly, enforcement, whether it's through policing, the IAS service, all of that has absolutely been accelerated, along with the checks. The fact of the matter is we do have clear checks. Passenger locator form must be completed. There are fines for non-compliance. There's a requirement for self-isolation for arrivals. These measures and these checks are in place, and they will be increased clearly to protect public health.
And now we go to Stephen Bonner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It has been widely reported that the Home Secretary called for tougher sanctions at the border than these somewhat reduced measures she is announcing here today. Has she been overruled and undermined yet again?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I reiterate, Madam Deputy Speaker, first of all, I'd refer the gentleman to my statement and the measures that have been announced. It's important to recognise that every single measure that has been put in place, including a ban on international travel for high-risk countries, they are in place to protect the British public. And these measures, along with all the other measures announced today, are part of this layer of protection to reduce transmission of the virus and reduce new risks of a new dangerous variant coming into the United Kingdom.
And now we go to... Oh, I wasn't expecting to go to... Do we not have... Well, we will go to Matt Weston.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State said that a layered approach has been introduced since, I think, January last year, but we saw rugby fans coming from Italy. We saw football fans coming from Spain in early March. They may not have been identified as dangerous or high-risk countries, but clearly they were. So it seems like we seem to be shutting the arrivals gate after the virus has bolted. How does the Secretary of State suggest we will identify those nations across the globe where there will be new variants developing? Because clearly it's not just places like Brazil and South Africa. People continue to travel around the world.
Speaker, I mentioned in my statement earlier on that the Foreign Office, but also the Department of Health and Social Care, they are actually now supporting other countries when it comes to gene sequencing, genomic testing capabilities around the world, which will help to identify new strains and new variants. That is absolutely important because that's a vital step towards the support towards this global response, not just in terms of protecting our public here, but also identifying new and dangerous strains that could, go around the world and then come to the UK.
Mark Harper.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the proportionate nature of the statement that the Home Secretary has made. Can I just take it back to the question I asked her yesterday during the urgent question? Given that these measures are to deal with a risk of a new strain of the virus coming to the United Kingdom that might not be susceptible to the vaccine, the UK Chief Scientific Advisor said the virus will be with us forever. Is this a permanent regime with countries being added to and taken off the red list as appropriate? And if it's not permanent, what is the trigger for removing it in the future?
It's a very important question. In terms of permanency, we are living with this virus. That is a fact. But obviously in better news as well, we are seeing people, and we're just weeks away from seeing people that have had the vaccine develop immunity as well. So circumstances are changing. And the point being, as we know, throughout this situation, things change. So with that, of course, we keep all our measures under review. And alongside that, whether it's changes to travel bans for specific countries, those will always be under review, and the government will not hesitate to take measures when it comes to preventing a new strain from coming to the United Kingdom once that has been identified, but also making sure that we take the right measures to protect the public. And I think, as I've said a number of times now, at every stage we will keep all colleagues, the House informed, but importantly make sure that public advice is also being communicated to members of the British public so that they understand that when things change, whether it's in terms of countries at the border, they are also being kept informed.
Now we go to Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last week, the Home Secretary told a private meeting of Conservative Party members that she was calling for borders to be closed back in March 2020. If it was right then, it must apply even more so in the face of this new variant. So can she reassure the House that she has told her Cabinet colleagues that the measures that she's announced today are sufficient to protect our borders and prevent a new variant from entering the country?
I refer actually the gentleman to the point that I've made earlier on, that there is no single measure that mitigates risk or eradicates risk entirely. I think that's a really important point to emphasise. Every aspect, every measure that has been brought in place since January last year and more recently has helped to reduce the risk of the spread of coronavirus and protect our world-leading vaccine programme. And these measures today, within the context of the vaccine that we have, taking measures to protect the public, are absolutely the right measures. And of course, as I've said throughout, I appreciate his party may want to write history, or their own history and their own positions around measures at the border and also action on coronavirus, but the fact of the matter, they've been wrong throughout.
And now we go to Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst I recognise the negative impact on businesses and individuals, I do give my right honourable friend my full support on these proposals, and I'm confident that that would be the overwhelming view of my constituents. But I turn to those people who will be resident in hotels. Clearly, there will be an element of contact between them, however well policed it is. Could my right honourable friend give an assurance that there will be appropriate measures in place to limit mixing to the absolute minimum?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right, because it's social contact with people that spreads this virus, which is why the measures in place, but also the current advice through lockdown is to stay at home and not to travel. I do just want to restate, we are working quickly across government right now, across the whole of government, with the industry, with partners and organisations within the sector to bring these new measures and work on the hotel package. And of course, further detail, Madam Deputy Speaker, will be put out in due course.
Now we go to Natalie Elphick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last month, the World Health Organization and the EU Transport Commissioner censured France for their border closures, which disrupted vital food, medicine and other goods, as well as causing Christmas chaos at the Dover border. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the UK's proportionate public health border measures continue to exempt hauliers in line with recommended international practice during the pandemic, And will she join me in calling on France to follow UK's lead and remove unnecessary trade restrictions on the Dover-Calais route?
It is absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker, and she, like me, will recognise the incredible work that took place in December and actually is still taking place when it comes to testing road hauliers to allow the flow of goods and freight, which is incredibly important. And she's also right about the position of the World Health Organization and the EU Transport Commissioner, because it's that proportionality approach that's required when it comes to the flow of goods. And we have good international practice behind us now, which is something that should be commended, but also something that should be shared with other countries.
And now we go to Dave Duggan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable and learned friend, the member for Edinburgh South West, wrote to the Home Secretary last April raising concerns about passengers entering the UK via airports without health checks or quarantining. 5 weeks later, the Home Secretary replied to her stating that, in her view, the 8th of June was the right time to introduce a requirement on passengers to self-isolate for 14 days who could be contracted to ensure compliance, and that any breach of compliance was punishable with a £1,000 fine. Can the Home Secretary update the House? How many £1,000 fines were issued as a result of this? And does she regret her role in the government's dithering over quarantine while COVID access to our communities through airports?
Speaker, in relation to government measures at the border, health measures at the border, the Honourable Gentleman will be very clear, and I suggest he reads my statement yesterday in terms of the points that were made, the measures that have been brought in since January last year. So the dithering is on his side in terms of actually reflecting the work that has been undertaken. In terms of checks at the border, Border Force have checked over 3.7 million passengers over recent, this is specific with regards to FPNs, and thousands of FPN notices have been issued, fines have been issued as well. And as I have repeatedly said, Madam Deputy Speaker, Border Force are enforcing now 100% checks on passengers, which is absolutely the right thing to do.
Now we go to Damian Collins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Home Secretary knows, more than 8,000 people entered the UK last year by crossing the channel in small vessels in order to claim asylum when they arrived. Could you say what impact her statement today has on the system of managing quarantine for people that arrive and enter the asylum system? And also, given the recent major outbreak of coronavirus at Napier Barracks in Folkestone, where many have been accommodated, can she confirm the Home Office is working to reduce the number of asylum claimants at Napier and that there will be no new people arriving because until this COVID outbreak is under control?
Friend is absolutely right to speak of clandestine entry. First of all, rules will apply, testing will apply to everyone with regards to illegal entry to the United Kingdom and those that are seeking to claim asylum. Although our policy is clear, they should be claiming asylum in the first safe country and not risking their lives by travelling through a small boat or illegally being trafficked by people traffickers. Secondly, with regards to Napier, he's absolutely right. We have COVID compliant measures in place already in line with Public Health England. And I'd like to commend our partner Kent County Council for the work that they're doing with us as well in terms of safeguarding people at Napier, but also making sure, and we are going to enhance our measures now even further to prevent the spread of coronavirus and to protect public health. So I would like to give him that assurance, and I'm also very happy to speak to him further about that if he's got any other questions that he'd like to raise with me about Napier.
And finally, we go to Leila Moran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, in the week where we've counted 100,000 dead, the Home Secretary's announcement is, of course, welcome. Better late than never. But these measures will not work without 100% compliance with isolation, and currently only 1 in 5 people asked to self-isolate in the UK do. Evidence we've examined in the all-party group on coronavirus shows very clearly that carrots are often much more effective than sticks in such measures. So does she agree with me that if the government ensured no loss of earnings from isolation, as other countries do, that this might help improve compliance with self-isolation and so cut those chains of transmission?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's important to put this into the context of travel and the measures that we have put in place around compliance and the checks. So I've already stated Border Force are undertaking 100% checks to PCPs. But also when it comes to carriers, there is now a carrier liability measure in place for them to, they'll be fined, they will be given a fine if they are not checking their travellers before they actually get on their planes and get on their planes in particular. So these are stringent measures with significant penalties and significant fines in place. And the carriers, who are also operational partners that we work with, are very, very clear about that. But she is right about the point on self-isolation. Self-isolation that must take place. And of course, that is why across government, and this isn't just Home Office, this is with Health, the Isolation Assurance Service, along with the police as well, we are working collaboratively across the board to ensure that those measures are being adhered to and enforced.
Thank you. Order. I have now to announce the result of today's deferred divisions. On the draft West Yorkshire Combined Authority election of mayor and functions order 2021, the ayes were 553, the noes were 2, so the ayes have it, the ayes have it. I have also received notice of a point of order from Mr. John Nicholson. Do we have a connection to John Nicholson? Point of order, Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 10th of December, when responding to my question on a recent Information Commissioner's Office report into political parties' data collection, the Minister of State for Media and Data, the Right Honourable Member for Malden, claimed that the Information Commissioner did not find that any breaches of the law had occurred when the Conservative Party collected the personal data of more than 10 million people based on their race and religion. He repeated a version of that claim when appearing before the DCMS Select Committee. However, the Information Commissioner appeared before that committee yesterday and confirmed to me that the Conservative Party had acted illegally. Indeed, she had required the party to delete the data it had illegally collected. Now, I'm sure the Right Honourable Gentleman will be mortified to learn that he has inadvertently misled the House on this important matter. And I wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, if he could be afforded the opportunity to withdraw his false claim and commit that the Conservative Party will not conduct illegal racial and religious profiling in the future.
Why, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Ochil and South Perthshire for notice of his point of order and for confirming to me that he has also given notice of his intention to raise this matter to the Minister concerned, the Right Honourable Member for Malden. I can answer the Honourable Gentleman in this way. In general terms, I can certainly confirm that in the event that the answer that a Minister has given here in the Chamber transpires to be